Hello everyone! My name is Jenna, but you guys can call me Jen, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome, my friends, to the last video of 2020 on my channel, to my last video of 2020. Hi, hello! We are here today in my library where it is extremely sunny. I am just going to optimize this incredible sunshine we're getting today that is hitting this corner of my library, which never hits this corner of my library. So today is my 2020 wrap up, my 2020 reflections, my 2020 stats video, whatever you want to call it. I am here to talk about everything that I read in 2020, to discuss it with you guys, to go over the stats with you guys, and I'm so excited to do this. So I have a ton of sticky notes breaking down my year that I went over. I did a little bit of research and kind of compiled my thoughts into something a little bit more put together. And let's just get into this. Alright, so according to Goodreads and according to my own tracking abilities, I read 145 books this year. That is the most amount of books I have ever read in a year, ever. Ever. And I'm so proud of myself for doing so, because a lot of these books were really large and I hit my goal. My goal was 100 books at the beginning of 2020, and with this year being its craziness, I managed to read above and beyond that. I think I hit 100 books in September, so I was very lucky that I just had so much time to read this year. And I also hit my goal of reading the amount of classics I wanted to, and I read really long books this year. Also, according to Goodreads, out of all those 145 books accumulated to be 54,256 pages read, which is crazy. That's so many pages. The shortest book that I read this year was Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Promise graphic novel part 1, which was 76 pages, and the longest book that I read this year was A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin, which is the third Game of Thrones book. That's crazy. This year I actually thought that one of my, The Way of Kings, one of my Brandon Sanderson books would have been the longest this year. But besides that, the longest book was over 1,000 pages long, which is craziness. According to Goodreads, my average rating was 4.2 stars. But because Goodreads does not have half stars, it does not take into account all of my 3.5s that became 4 stars, all of my 4.5s that became 5 stars. So I did the math myself. My average rating is actually a 4.02, so just about a 4 star, which is crazy good. I've read a lot of really, really good books this year, and a fair amount of not great ones either, but when I was looking back at my ratings, I have nothing below a 2 star, which I think is a comment on my own rating and my inability to give a book a 1 star unless I vehemently hate it. The very first book that I read in 2020 was Race the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst. It was an ARC that I received from HarperCollins. It was also a release in 2020 that was coming out early 2020, and I really, really liked it. I ended up giving that one 5 stars. So good. Such a great way to start 2020. And the last book that I've read in 2020 so far, because I do have 2 that are still on the go, and there is a few days left of 2020, so I might possibly read 1 or 2 more books. Who knows? The last book that I read was Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, and that was also a 5 star. It was a brand new favorite of mine, actually, up with my top 4, top 3, possibly even top 2 favorite YA fantasies ever. It is so good, you guys. So good. Let's talk about my best reading months. So this year in August, that was my best reading month. I ended up reading 15 books, and the runners-up are February, October, and December, in which I read 14 books apiece. December might end up being my best reading month if I end up reading 2 more books this month, because then that'll bring it up to 16 or 15 and match with August, but these are the 4 best months that I've had this year. And they're really well spaced out. February was the beginning of the year, August was the middle of the year, October was fall, and December is the end. So all in all, very good reading. The worst reading month, i.e. worst, which I still read a lot of books in, was September, where I read 9 books, which is understandable because September, my teaching job started back up again, and it was just generally busier that month, so I had to readjust and rebalance my reading. The second worst reading month was June, where I read 10 books. And on average, I read 12 books a month, which is crazy. That's almost a book every 2 days. All right, let's break it down into genres. So my top 4 genres of 2020 were YA fantasy, fantasy, middle grade, which I considered a genre. I know it's an age bracket, but I considered it a genre, and romance. So I considered middle grade a genre in my bullet journal because there wasn't enough space to break it down into like middle grade fantasy, middle grade contemporary. But I am planning on doing a better split C system with my genres. So this was my genre graph, and as you can tell, the tallest one was YA fantasy. So I ended up reading 29 YA fantasies this year. I ended up reading 27 adult fantasies this year, which is the most adult fantasy that I have ever read, because I have been trying to branch out into my adult fantasies and to read more of them, because I love YA fantasy. Fantasy is my favorite thing in the entire world, and I want to get into adult fantasy more, and I definitely succeeded this year, because holy moly, that's a lot of adult fantasies. I ended up reading 26 middle grade because this year was also the year where I decided to really get into my middle grades, and I loved so many of them. My last top 4 was romance, where I read 17 romances this year, which is really good because I'm also trying to get out of my comfort zone and read more widely in my genres. So speaking of that, I also ended up reading 14 classics, which is amazing because I made a goal for myself to read 1 classic a month. I didn't hit that goal, but I still read over 12 classics, so I'm counting it anyways. I ended up reading also 14 general fiction books, so like literary fiction, adult fiction, books that I didn't really know where to put went into that category. I ended up reading 7 YA books, just other YA books, so contemporary, historical, that kind of a thing. I read 4 mysteries, 3 sci-fis, 2 nonfictions, and 2 graphic novels. Out of all the books that I read in 2020, I DNF'd only 3. I would have DNF'd more, but the books that I would have DNF'd were part of a book club that I was doing with my friends, and they wouldn't let me DNF them. They said that I had to read them for book club. So I ended up reading them anyways, and I don't think I gave any of them lower than a 2-star, as I said before. And I don't think I was reading anything super disappointing this year. As I said, my average rating was a 4-star. So it was just a really good reading year, you guys. I guess I should go over my star ratings. Even though I did give you my average, I guess I could discuss how many of each rating I gave. So the least amount of ratings I gave was a 2.5 star. There's only 1. There are 5 2-stars, 13 3-stars, 23 3.5 stars, 31 4 stars, 34 4.5 stars, and 35 5 stars. I have many 5 stars, but like comparative wise to the other ones, I did read many more books that weren't 5 stars. So, but there are still in my head probably too many 5 stars on this list, because I'm the kind of person who rates right after they finish a book. So I need to just learn to not do that and to like rest on a book and give it a good thought. So that's actually one of my goals for 2021, is to put every single book that I read through a system, a rating system. I think I'm gonna do G from Book Roast's Compile system, because that one makes the most sense to me and it's easy. It's very easy. I think I'm gonna do that and make sure that everything is rated properly in my head, and everything is rated the same then. Everything is rated through the same system and not just on my pure enjoyment. And I think I'm going to try and save my 5 stars for new favorites of mine. If it's not any favorite, it's just not a 5-star for me. I think that's my goal for 2021, is to fix my rating system, because honestly there are, like looking back, there are probably 4 stars that shouldn't be 4 stars. They should be 3 stars or 3.5 stars. And there are 3 stars that definitely shouldn't be 3 stars. They should be like 2 or 2.5, you know? So I really need to fix my rating system in 2021. That's enough. That's like a big thing. But okay, so that kind of finishes the stats part of this video. This year, what went on this year in my reading? So this was the year that I fell in love with middle grades and the Rick Riordan imprint and Rick Riordan's world, really. Because when I think back of this year, this is the year that I read the entire Heroes of Olympus series, and I started in on Magnus Chase, I started in on Trials of Apollo, I reread the Percy Jackson series really recently as well, and I just adore Rick Riordan's world so much. This is also the year, as I said, that I got into his imprint even more. I started reading more books in his mythological book middle grade imprint, and I love them so much. They are some of my favorite middle grades, if not all my favorite middle grades. And besides that imprint, I discovered so many different middle grades this year that I absolutely love, like the Aggie Morton books and the Pages & Co. series. It was just such a good year for middle grades. It was just so good. As I said, it was my third most read genre of the year. I should really just call it a category. My categories of reading. Third most read category of reading. Along with middle grades, I also fell in love with historical romances and more historical books as well. I read more historical books in general than I have in many years, and I fell in love with them, especially like The Lovely War by Julie Berry and the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society I loved, and I also, for the first time, read historical romance, which I have fallen in love with as well. I think I read 3 or 4 this year. 2 were kind of eh, and 2 were pretty good, and I'm still always going to be looking for historical romances to read and fall in love with. I rediscovered my love for the Hunger Games this year in preparation for the prequel that was coming out, A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I ended up rereading the trilogy and finally finishing the last book in the trilogy and just falling in love with that world all over again and remembering how much I loved it in high school and why I ever stopped thinking I loved it. I don't know why. I love that series so much. The books are not, it's not a 5-star series, but it is a fantastic series to me, and I just love it so much. The prequel could do without, but the original canonical trilogy is great. This year I found a new favorite romance of all time, Get Life, Chloe Brown, and also a new favorite romance author, Talia Hibbert. I ended up finding new favorite books and also just favorite books of all time this year, namely In the Starless Sea and The House in the Cerulean Sea, and as I said earlier in this video, a favorite YA fantasy, which is Legendborn, and another one, Raybearer, and another one, The Merciful Crow. It was just such a good reading year, and I can't believe I found 2 new favorite books of all time. Like The Starless Sea and The House in the Cerulean Sea are incredible, and they are some of my favorite books ever. I didn't complete all the books that I wanted to read in 2020. I remember doing a video at the beginning of the year where I said these are the series that I want to complete in 2020. I didn't really complete them all, but I did complete many of them, and the ones that I remember that were in that video were the the Heroes of Olympus series by Rick Riordan. I did finish that one this year. And the Darker Shade of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab I finished this year, and I am on track to finish the Mistborn trilogy this year. I read that trilogy in its entirety this year, which is incredible. I have only half of the Hero of Ages left to go, which I'm hoping to have finished by the end of 2020, so I'm including that in this video as though I did finish it. I also fell in love with Arthurian legend this year. I've read, let me see here, what have I got around me? I read The Lost Queen by Signe Pike. I read The Guinevere Deception by Kiersten White. I read Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. And I ended up watching this show, Merlin, which I absolutely adore. And I think I have found my new favorite, legend, my new favorite branch of retelling and magic and myth in a way with the Arthurian legend. And I just love it so much, and I cannot wait to keep diving in and exploring more Arthurian legend books. This year, I have come across a few authors that are on track to being favorite authors of mine, but I need to read more books of theirs to thus decide that they are favorite authors of mine. So I am calling them authors I need to read more from, and they are Tracy Deonn, of course, because Legendborn was iconic, and I cannot believe that was her debut. It was so good, you guys. I'm so excited for the sequel. Cannot wait for that one, so I'm definitely going to be buying anything that she writes because it's just so good. Robert Jackson Bennett, I read, I believe, I can only remember the name of the sequel, and it's called Shorefall, but I want to read more of his books because his magic system in the Shorefall series is really good, and I really enjoyed the uniqueness of this magic system, so I really want to read more from him. I also want to read more of Robin Hobb because I've only read one of her fantasy books, but I've heard incredible things about her, that she's like the queen fantasy. So I want to keep reading her books as well. I want to read more from Kiley Reid, who wrote Such a Fun Age, because that book was just impeccable earlier this year. I also want to reread that book when I get my hands on a physical copy, because I really would like a physical copy of that book. I would also like to read more of Victoria Aveyard's books because I read Red Queen this year and I've like followed her on Instagram, and I think she is a fantastic human being, and I would love to read more of her books just because like she interests me so much. And I cannot wait for her new book, her new series coming out, Realmbreaker. And of course, I would love to read more of Talia Hibbert this year. One of her books, the third book in her Brown Sisters series, is coming out this year, and I cannot wait for it. Eve Brown is going to be impeccable. I can just tell. I have read 3 of Talia Hibbert's books. I've read the 2 Brown Sisters books that have been released and her Christmassy novella, and I just love her writing style, and she's fast becoming a favorite author of mine. Really intrigued to keep exploring my authors on my shelves this year. I want to read more Brandon Sanderson. I want to read more V.E. Schwab because this was the year that I read the entire Darkest Shade of Magic trilogy, and I would like to read more of her books as well because I've read only those, The Near Witch and her 2 middle grades. She is close to being a favorite author of mine, but her next books that I read really have to like knock it out of the park for her to become a favorite author. I would also, as I said, just like to explore more fantasy, specifically women-written fantasy, like Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse was incredible, and I really want to read more women-written fantasy because it's such a male-dominated field that I really want to read more of the books written by women, as I keep saying. And of course, women of color, and just from all ends of the earth of fantasy. I'm staring up at my fantasy shelf right now, but some of my favorite fantasy books are The Prior of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I really enjoyed Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. So, you know, just here to read all the fantasy, and I want to get more into high fantasy. So like the Joe Abercrombie, I can think of the title but I can't think of the author's name, and it's called The Bone Shard Daughter. I have that one. I have the paperback on pre-order, which is coming out in April, which I'm very excited to get because the paperback looks gorgeous. And that one's written by women, I know that. And I believe she's a woman of color as well, so looking forward to that one. And I just want to dive into my fantasy worlds even more. This year I have really discovered a love for urban fantasy, and like especially dark academic fantasy and historical fantasy. Those are like my niches that I absolutely adore, and I just want to keep exploring those as well as getting into more of my high fantasy books next year. My goals, as I've been talking about, that I want to keep reading in my fantasy, I also want to keep diversifying my reading, so keep reading and seeking out books by people of color. I just want to keep diversifying my reading in all ways, in racial ways and in own voices ways, just everything that I can. I want to keep diversifying my reading because those are the best books that I have read, really. I also would like to read more outside my comfort genre. I know I said that I want to read more fantasy, but I also want to read more adult. I want to read more historical, I want to read more literary, and I want to try and see if I can find my niche in like the thriller genre, because as I've said earlier this year, I've like really recently actually, I don't think like thriller horrors are for me. They just don't vibe with me. The writing styles don't usually work for me, and it just feels so disconnected. That's why I really love fantasies and YA fantasies and stuff like that, because you get so connected to the story and they just work so well. So maybe my niche will be discovering like YA mystery thrillers or something, but I want to keep reading outside my comfort genre. I'm keeping my goals the same for this year as well, 100 books, and I want to read a classic a month as well, which is going to be really interesting. Alright, we've come to the part of the video where I have to actually stand up and count things. So let me do that. I'm back. Okay, so If you guys remember, at the beginning of 2020, I counted all of my unread books on my physical TBR, so my TBR that I own, on my shelves, how many books I had, and I had 186. 186 unread books, not counting my classics. I also had brought that number down in the summer to around the 130s. So I just went around and counted all my unread books on my shelves, not including my classics, and I have now 166 unread books. So yes, I have more than I had in the summer, but I still have less than I started 2020 with, which I am so happy about. That means I am going in the right direction. This year I kept track of how many physical books I read. It doesn't look like a lot because I didn't color them all in, but the amount of books that were on my physical TBR that I read, I also included these, like, the ones that I hauled. I don't have an exact number of how many books that I hauled this year. I did haul, I think, 62 since August. So I did pretty good at keeping up and keeping that number down below 180. So this year coming up, I would like that number to get closer to the 100 mark, if I could. And that includes DNFing books, that gets them off my unread pile. That also includes unhauling, of course, and reading. So this year I read 94 physical books that I owned. This also included the books that I hauled as well. So that's really crazy good. And that doesn't even include the 9 new classics that I read this year. So out of the 14 classics that I read, 9 were brand new to me, and the other 5 were rereads, which makes sense because I reread a lot of my like Pride and Prejudice and stuff like that. So I'm very happy with this reading year, you guys. It's been a great reading year. So 2021, my goals, as I said, 100 books, 12 classics, 1 classic a month. I would also like to bring my TBR, my physical TBR, down to near 100 books. So that means I have to read at least 60 books that I own without hauling any more. So I'm going on a book buying ban for as long as I can because I don't need any more books. I don't want any more books right now. I will say, I have books on pre-order for 2021. I have already placed these pre-orders. I am very excited about them all, and you will hear about them in my video on Friday. So that is the 2021 releases that I'm excited about. Oh, I have more books coming to me. I just remembered that I ordered a few more. I have 3 more books coming to me because I decided to do one last book order this year, and they are The Blue Castle by Ellen Montgomery, The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, and Half a King by Joan Abercrombie. So I'm excited about all of those, and I will plan on reading them when I get them. So 166, really it's 169 books if we're considering those ones that are coming to me in the mail. So 169 books going into 2021, plus those pre-orders that I'm coming in. I don't remember exactly how many pre-orders that I have. And if you guys remember, I did have my TBR mug full of little paper slips. So my plan is to go through those because I know I've read some that were in there now and I just have to remove them. I have to go through them, and then I'm going to try and write down all the books that I need to read and use that as my like prompt thing to is read as many books that are on my physical TBR as I can. I have a feeling in my heart that 2021 is going to be a great year. It really can only look up from here, you guys, but I'm excited. I'm excited for a new year, and I'm excited to keep reading and to keep loving what I'm reading. That is another one. If I don't love it, I want to DNF it. So you guys should too. If you don't love a book, don't put in the effort. Put it down. There are other books you can go read that are much better than that one. You should all make that a goal, is to read books that you actually love reading. We should all make that a goal in 2021. Read books that we actually love to read. So, all right, my friends, that is it from me. That's it for me in 2020. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like this video if you haven't yet. It shows me that you like this content and you're ready for a new year as well. And I will catch you in another video very, very soon, literally in like 2 days for you guys. And I will catch you in 2021. Stay kind and keep on reading.